The Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Section 28. Summer passed by. The Stirling clan, with the insignificant exception of cousin Georgiana, had tacitly agreed to follow Uncle James's example and look upon Valancy as one dead. To be sure, Valancy had an unquiet, ghostly habit of recurring resurrections when she and Barney clattered through Deerwood and out to the port in that unspeakable car. Valancy, bareheaded, with stars in her eyes. Barney, bareheaded, smoking his pipe. But shaved. Always shaved now, if any of them had noticed it. They even had the audacity to go into Uncle Benjamin's store to buy groceries. Twice Uncle Benjamin ignored them. Was not Valancy one of the dead, while Snaith had never existed? But the third time he told Barney he was a scoundrel who should be hung for luring an unfortunate, weak-minded girl away from her home and friends. Barney's one straight eyebrow went up. "I have made her happy," he said coolly. "And she was miserable with her friends, so that's that." Uncle Benjamin stared. It had never occurred to him that women had to be, or ought to be, made happy. You pup," he said. "Why be so unoriginal?" queried Barney amiably. "Anybody could be a pup. Why not think of something worthy of the Stirlings? Besides, I'm not a pup. I'm really quite a middle-aged dog. 35 if you're interested in knowing." Uncle Benjamin remembered just in time that Valancy was dead. He turned his back on Barney. Valancy was happy, gloriously and entirely so. She seemed to be living in a wonderful house of life, and every day opened a new mysterious room. It was in a world which had nothing in common with the one she had left behind. A world where time was not, which was young with immortal youth, where there was neither past nor future, but only the present. She surrendered herself utterly to the charm of it. The absolute freedom of it all was unbelievable. They could do exactly as they liked. No Mrs. Grundy, no traditions, no relatives or in-laws. Peace, perfect peace with loved ones far away, as Barney quoted shamelessly. Valancy had gone home once and got her cushions, and cousin Georgiana had given her one of her famous candlewick spreads of most elaborate design. "For your spare room bed, dear," she said. "But I haven't got any spare room," said Valancy. Cousin Georgiana looked horrified. A house without a spare room was monstrous to her. "But it's a lovely spread," said Valancy with a kiss, "and I'm so glad to have it. I'll put it on my own bed. Barney's old patchwork quilt is getting ragged." "I don't see how you can be contented to live up back," sighed cousin Georgiana. "It's so out of the world." "Contented?" Valancy laughed. What was the use of trying to explain to cousin Georgiana? "It is," she agreed, "most gloriously and entirely out of the world." "And you're really happy, dear?" asked cousin Georgiana wistfully. "I really am," said Valancy gravely, her eyes dancing. "Marriage is such a serious thing," sighed cousin Georgiana. "When it's going to last long," agreed Valancy. Cousin Georgiana did not understand this at all, but it worried her, and she lay awake at nights wondering what Valancy meant by it. Valancy loved her blue castle and was completely satisfied with it. The big living room had 3 windows, all commanding exquisite view of exquisite Miss Davis. The one in the end of the room was an oriel window, which Tom McMurray, Barney explained, had got out of some little old up-back church that had been sold. It faced the west, and when the sunsets flooded it, Valancy's whole being knelt in prayer, as if in some great cathedral. The new moons always looked down through it. The lower pine boughs swayed about the top of it, and all through the nights the soft, dim silver of the lake dreamed through it. There was a stone fireplace on the other side. No desecrating gas imitation, but a real fireplace, where you could burn real logs. With a big grizzly bearskin on the floor before it, and beside it a hideous red plush sofa of Tom McMurray's regime. But its ugliness was hidden by silver-grey timber wolf skins, and Valancy's cushions made it gay and comfortable. In a corner a nice tall lazy old clock ticked. The right kind of a clock, one that did not hurry the hours away, but ticked them off deliberately. It was the jolliest looking old clock, a fat, corpulent clock with a great round man's face painted on it, the hands stretching out of its nose and the hours encircling it like a halo. There was a big glass case of stuffed owls and several deer heads, likewise of Tom McMurray's vintage. Some comfortable old chairs that asked to be sat upon. A squat little chair with a cushion was prospectively Banjo's. If anybody else dared sit on it, Banjo glared him out of it with his topaz-hued, black-ringed eyes. Banjo had an adorable habit of hanging over the back of it, trying to catch his own tail, losing his temper because he couldn't catch it, giving it a fierce bite for spite when he did catch it, yowling malignantly with pain. Barney and Valancy laughed at him until they ached. But it was Good Luck they loved. They were both agreed that Good Luck was so lovable that he practically amounted to an obsession. One side of the wall was lined with rough, homemade bookshelves filled with books, and between the two side windows hung an old mirror in a faded gilt frame, with fat cupids gambolling in the panel over the glass. A mirror, Valancy thought, that must be like the fabled mirror into which Venus had once looked, and which thereafter reflected as beautiful every woman who looked into it. Valancy thought she was almost pretty in that mirror, but that may be because she had shingled her hair. This was before the day of bobs, and was regarded as a wild, unheard-of proceedings, unless you had typhoid. When Mrs. Frederick heard of it, she almost decided to erase Valancy's name from the family Bible. Barney cut the hair square off at the back of Valancy's neck, bringing it down into a short black fringe over her forehead. It gave a meaning and a purpose to her little three-cornered face that it never had possessed before. Even her nose ceased to irritate her. Her eyes were bright, and her sallow skin had cleared to the hue of creamy ivory. The old family joke had come true. She was really fat at last. Anyway, no longer skinny. Valancy might never be beautiful, but she was of the type that looks its best in the woods, elfin, mocking, alluring. Her heart bothered her very little. When an attack threatened, she was generally able to head it off with Dr. Trent's prescription. The only bad one she had was one night when she was temporarily out of medicine, and it was a bad one. For the time being, Valancy realized keenly that death was actually waiting to pounce on her any moment. But the rest of the time she did not let herself remember it at all. End of chapter 28.
Chapter 29. Valancy toiled not, neither did she spin. There was really very little work to do. She cooked their meals on a coal-oil stove, performing all her little domestic rites carefully and exultingly, and they ate out on the veranda that almost overhung the lake. Before them lay Miss Stowis, like a scene out of some fairy tale of old time, and Barney smiling his twisted, enigmatical smile at her across the table. "What a view old Tom picked out when he built this shack," Barney would say exultantly. Supper was the meal Valancy liked best. The faint laughter of winds was always about them, and the colors of the Mistawis, imperial and spiritual under the changing clouds, were something that cannot be expressed in mere words. Shadows, too, clustering in the pines until a wind shook them out and pursued them over the Mistawis. They lay all day along the shores, threaded by ferns and wild blossoms. They stole around the headlands in the glow of the sunset, until twilight wove them all into one great web of dusk. The cats, with their wise, innocent little faces, would sit on the veranda railing and eat the tidbits Barney flung at them. And how good everything tasted! Valancy, amid all the romance of the Mistawis, never forgot that men had stomachs. Barney paid her no end of compliments on her cooking. "After all," he admitted, "there's something to be said for square meals. I've mostly got along by boiling 2 or 3 dozen eggs hard at once and eating a few when I got hungry, with a slice of bacon once in a while and a jorum of tea." Valancy poured tea out of Barney's little battered old pewter teapot of incredible age. She had not even a set of dishes, only Barney's mismatched chip bits, and a dear big pobby old jug of robin's egg blue. After the meal was over, they would sit there and talk for hours, or sit and say nothing, in the languages of the world, Barney pulling away at his pipe, Valancy dreaming idly and deliciously, gazing at the far-off hills beyond Mistawis, where the spires of firs came out against the sunset. The moonlight would begin to silver the Mistawis. Bats would begin to swoop darkly against the pale western gold. A little waterfall that came down on the high bank not far away would, by some whim of the wildwood gods, begin to look like a wonderful white woman beckoning through the spicy, fragrant evergreens. And Leander would begin to chuckle diabolically on the mainland shore. How sweet it was to sit there and do nothing in the beautiful silence, with Barney at the other side of the table smoking. There were plenty of other islands in sight, though none of them were near enough to be troublesome as neighbors. There was one little group of islets far off to the west, which they called the Fortunate Isles. At sunrise they looked like a cluster of emeralds, at sunset like a cluster of amethysts. They were too small for houses, but the lights on the larger islands would bloom out all over the lake, and bonfires would be lighted on their shores, streaming up into the wood shadows, and throwing great blood-red ribbons over the waters. Music would drift to them alluringly from boats here and there, or from the veranda of the big house of the millionaire on the biggest island. "Would you like a house like that, Moonlight?" asked Barney once, waving his hand at it. He had taken to calling her Moonlight, and Valancy loved it. "No," said Valancy, who had once dreamed of a mountain castle 10 times the size of the rich man's cottage, and now pitied the poor inhabitants of palaces. "No, it's too elegant. I would have to carry it with me everywhere I went, on my back like a snail. It would own me, possess me, body and soul. I like a house I can love and cuddle and boss, just like ours here. I don't envy Hamilton Gozard, the finest summer residence in Canada. It is magnificent, but it isn't my blue castle." Away down at the far end of the lake they got every night a glimpse of a big continental train rushing through the clearing. Valancy liked to watch its lighted windows flash by and wonder who was on it and what hopes and fears it carried. She also amused herself by picturing Barney and herself going to the dances and dinners in the houses on the islands, but she did not want to go in reality. Once they did go to a masquerade dance in the pavilion at one of the hotels up the lake, and had a glorious evening, but slipped away in their canoe before unmasking time, back to the Blue Castle. "It was lovely, but I don't want to go back again," said Valancy. So many hours a day Barney shut himself in the Bluebeard's chamber. Valancy never saw the inside of it. From the smells that filtered through at times, she concluded he must be conducting chemical experiments or counterfeiting money. Valancy supposed there must be smelly processes in making counterfeit money, but she did not trouble herself about it. She had no desire to peer into the locked chambers of Barney's house of life. His past and his future concerned her not, only this rapturous present. Nothing else mattered. Once he went away and stayed away 2 days and nights. He had asked Valancy if she would be afraid to stay alone, and she had said she would not. He never told her where he had been. She was not afraid to be alone, but she was horribly lonely. The sweetest sound she had ever heard was Lady Jane's clatter through the woods when Barney returned, and then his signal whistle from the shore. She ran down to the landing rock to greet him, to nestle herself into his eager arms. They did seem eager. "Have you missed me, Moonlight?" Barney was whispering. "It seems 100 years since you went away," said Valancy. "I won't leave you again." "You must," protested Valancy, "if you want to. I'd be miserable if I thought you wanted to go and didn't because of me. I want you to feel perfectly free." Barney laughed a little cynically. "There's no such thing as freedom on earth," he said. "Only different kinds of bondages, and comparative bondages. You think you are free now because you've escaped from a peculiarly unbearable kind of bondage. But are you? You love me, that's a bondage." "Who said or wrote that the prison unto which we doom ourselves no prison is?" asked Valancy dreamily, clinging to his arm as they climbed up the rock steps. "Ah, now you have it," said Barney. "That's all the freedom we can hope for, the freedom to choose our prison. But moonlight—" He stopped at the door of the blue castle and looked about him, at the glorious lake, the great shadowy woods, the bonfires, the twinkling lights. "Moonlight, I'm glad to be home again. When I came down through the woods and saw my home lights, mine, gleaming out under the old pines, something I'd never seen before, oh, girl, I was glad, glad." But in spite of Barney's doctrine of bondage, Valancy thought they were splendidly free. It was amazing to be able to sit up half the night and look at the moon if you wanted to be late for meals if you wanted to. She, who had always been rebuked so sharply by her mother and so reproachfully by Cousin Stickles if she were 1 minute late. Dawdle over meals as long as you wanted to. Leave your crusts if you wanted to. Not come home at all for meals if you wanted to. Sit on a sun-warm rock and paddle your bare feet in the hot sand if you wanted to. Just sit and do nothing in the beautiful silence if you wanted to. In short, do any fool thing you wanted to whenever the notion took you. If that wasn't freedom, what was? End of chapter 29. Read by Christine Rucker.
Section 30. They didn't spend all their days on the island. They spent more than half of them wandering at will through the enchanted Muskoka country. Barney knew the woods as a book, and he taught their lore and craft to Valancy. He could always find trail and haunt of the shy wood people. Valancy learned the different fairy likenesses of the mosses, the charm and exquisiteness of woodland blossoms. She learned to know every bird at sight and mimic its call, though never so perfectly as Barney. She made friends with every kind of tree. She learned to paddle a canoe as well as Barney himself. She liked to be out in the rain, and she never caught cold. Sometimes they took a lunch with them and went berrying, strawberries and blueberries. How pretty blueberries were! The dainty green of the unripe berries, the glossy pinks and scarlets of the half-ripes, the misty blue of the fully matured. And Valancy learned the real flavor of the strawberry in its highest perfection. There was a certain sunlit dell on the banks of Mistawis, along which white birches grew on one side, and on the other still, changeless ranks of young spruces. There were long grasses at the roots of the birches, combed down by the winds and wet with morning dew late into the afternoon. Here they found berries that might have graced the banquets of Lucullus, great ambrosial sweetnesses hanging like rubies to long rosy stalks. They lifted them by the stalk and ate them from it, uncrushed and virgin, tasting each berry by itself with all its wild fragrance and suffered therein. When Valancy carried any of these berries home, that elusive essence escaped, and they became nothing more than the common berries of the marketplace. Very kitchenly good indeed, but not as they would have been, eaten in their birch dell until her fingers were stained as pink as Aurora's eyelids. Or they went after water lilies. Barney knew where to find them, in the creeks and bays of Mistawis. Then the Blue Castle was glorious with them, every receptacle that Valancy could contrive filled with the exquisite things. If not water lilies, then cardinal flowers, fresh and vivid from the swamps of Mistawis, where they burned like ribbons of flame. Sometimes they went trouting on little nameless rivers or hidden brooks on whose banks naiads might have sunned their white, wet limbs. Then all they took with them were some raw potatoes and salt. They roasted the potatoes over a fire, and Barney showed Valancy how to cook the trout by wrapping them in leaves, coating them with mud, and baking them in a bed of hot coals. Never were such delicious meals. Valancy had such an appetite it was no wonder she put flesh on her bones. Or they just prowled and explored through the woods that always seemed to be expecting something wonderful to happen, At least, that was the way Valancy felt about them. Down the next hollow, over the next hill, you would find it. "We don't know where we're going, but isn't it fun to go?" Barney used to say. Once or twice night overtook them, too far from their blue castle to get back, but Barney made a fragrant bed of bracken and fir boughs, and they slept on it dreamlessly, under a ceiling of old spruces with moss hanging from them, while beyond them moonlight and the murmur of pines blended together so that one could hardly tell which was light and which was sound. There were rainy days, of course, when Muskoka was a wet green land, days when showers drifted across Mistawis like pale ghosts of rain, and they never thought of staying in because of it. Days when it rained in right good earnest, and they had to stay in. Then Barney shut himself in Bluebeard's chamber, and Valancy read, or dreamed on the wolfskins with Good Luck purring beside her, and Banjo watching them suspiciously from his own peculiar chair. On Sunday evenings they paddled across to a point of land, and walked from there through the woods to the little Free Methodist church. One felt really too happy for Sunday. Valancy had never really liked Sundays before. And always, Sundays and weekdays, she was with Barney. Nothing else really mattered. And what a companion he was. How understanding, how jolly, how Barney-like. That summed it all up. Valancy had taken some of her $200 out of the bank and spent it on pretty clothes. She had a little smoke blue chiffon, which she always put on when they spent the evenings at home. Smoke blue with touches of silver about it. It was after she began wearing it that Barney began calling her Moonlight. Moonlight and blue twilight. That is what you look like in that dress. I like it. It belongs to you. You aren't exactly pretty, but you have some adorable beauty spots. Your eyes, and that little kissable dent just between your collarbones. You have the wrist and ankle of an aristocrat. That little head of yours is beautifully shaped. And when you look backward over your shoulder, you're maddening, especially in twilight or moonlight. An elf maiden, a wood sprite. You belong to the woods. Moonlight, you should never be out of them. In spite of your ancestry, there is something wild and remote and untamed about you. And you have such a nice, sweet, throaty, summery voice. Such a nice voice for lovemaking. Sure, and you've kissed the Blarney Stone, scoffed Valancy. But she tasted these compliments for weeks. She got a pale green bathing suit, too. A garment which would have given her clan their deaths if they had ever seen her in it. Barney taught her how to swim. Sometimes she put her bathing dress on when she got up and didn't take it off until she went to bed, running down to the water for a plunge whenever she felt like it, and sprawling on the sun-warm rocks to dry. She had forgotten all the old humiliating things that used to come up against her in the night, the injustices and the disappointments. It was as if they had all happened to some other person, not to her, Valancy Snaith, who had always been happy. I understand now what it means to be born again, she told Barney. Holmes speaks of grief staining backward through the pages of life, but Valancy found her happiness had stained backward likewise, and flooded with rose color her whole previous drab existence. She found it hard to believe that she had ever been lonely and unhappy and afraid. When death comes, I shall have lived, thought Valancy. I shall have had my hour. And her dust pile. One day Valancy had heaped up the sand in the little island cove in a tremendous cone and stuck a gay little Union Jack on top of it. "What are you celebrating?" Barney wanted to know. "I'm just exorcising an old demon," Valancy told him. End of chapter 30.